Fire and Emergency Services Instructor, 8th Edition, Chapter 4, Instructional Materials and Equipment.
Alrighty, let's get moving for the day. As a reminder to everyone here, if you have issues with the course material, let me know. I highly recommend that you guys go back and check the videos, look at the videos for any courses you guys may have missed. That comment is directed towards everybody who is going to be watching this over the YouTube format. So just make sure that you guys are staying up on the material, and if you have any trouble with the material, let me know. So this morning we're going to start with Chapter 4, Instructional Materials and Equipment. First objective this morning is to identify the components of a lesson plan. So they have multiple purposes and benefits to students, instructors, and administrators. They provide uniformity across courses. When you guys go to start setting up things like Instructor 1 courses and Fire 1-2 courses and a lot of different stuff like that, the state actually has a planning template on their website that covers all the material that you need to include in your presentations. For the Fire 1-2 curriculum, the module A, B, C, D system, Penwell has lesson plans that are already done, so basically you just download the lesson plans, add your own information, and put it all together. But that provides uniformity because you've got people all throughout the state teaching the same course. So it gives you a clear path. It makes sure that, you know, everything that you need to talk about is documented in those lesson plans, and it sets down a clear path for you so you don't have to kind of grasp in the dark to set things up. It helps create consistency. So for example, you know, we're teaching an Instructor 1 course down here. The course should be relatively the same between a course here and a course anywhere throughout the state, as long as you follow the curriculum. It provides documentation. For example, a lot of times the quality assurance guys at the state and folks throughout the training divisions want to make sure that you have everything documented. So a lot of times they'll ask you to submit a syllabus and make sure that what you're teaching is correct. And it also provides a document for test requirements. So for example, my syllabus shows that we do X amount of classroom hours, X amount of practical hours, X amount of so on hours for the test. And then it provides that documentation. If anyone ever comes back and says, well, you didn't cover this material, I can refer back to my lesson plan and say, well, yes, here it is right here. We did this. So let's talk about the parts of a lesson plan this morning. You have your job or topic that you're going to be training to. You have a time frame. For example, this Instructor 1 course is the way the state has this set up is to deploy it over a week in a classroom for 40 hours. So what I did when I was planning this course is I took their course documents and I went back and said, okay, well, we need to do this topic on this day, this topic on that day, this topic on that day, and so on and so forth. Level of instruction, you're going to identify who you're teaching to, whether you're teaching to brand new firefighters or advanced firefighters. It basically maps that out as well. Your learning objectives, it tells you exactly what you're trying to accomplish with each and every single piece of your lecture. Talks about the resources and the materials needed. For example, during lesson 2, I had to make sure that I had rope on hand so you guys were able to tie the knots appropriately and make sure that you got that information. Also talks about prerequisites. So for example, in this lesson plan, the prerequisite to take this course is Firefighter 1 and 2 for a year. Your references, it will actually tell you where the material is coming from throughout the chapters. So for example, the reference for this chapter there's a YouTube video or two and some other stuff going on. It'll provide a lesson summary of what you're supposed to be delivering. It'll provide assignments that you want the students to take and go through for the class. It'll give you a basic outline as far as what you need to cover. And then it'll also cover evaluations. So as you'll notice, for each and every chapter we go through in the classroom, you will have a chapter quiz and a chapter test that are designed to let me know where you guys are having trouble with the information, and then change my course around accordingly to make sure you're getting the right information at the right time. Learning objectives should include the few things. It should include a performance statement, it should include a conditions description, and it should include standards criteria. So for a performance statement, it's going to tell you after this lesson, the student should be able to do X, Y, and Z. And then standards criteria mention how they're being measured, how you measure X, Y, and Z. Let's talk about job performance statements real quick. What are the three critical components of the JPR? We might have to refer back to the book. Your JPRs are laid out in NFPA standards, and they will actually list the job performance requirement of what the student should be able to accomplish after that training. So let's go back to the previous slide. They should include a performance statement, and they should include a description of the conditions, and they should include standards criteria. So you will hear a lot of people in education talk about JPRs. And those JPRs are laid out directly in the NFPA standards, and they should be listed as part of your class. For example, I believe it's in the evaluation portion of the class. It'll actually list the JPRs that you're supposed to be able to take care of. So what kind of things are you including in your lesson plans? Outline major points, detailed outline, major points, webinar guides, documentation, references, criteria. All right. Assignments, materials needed, time frame, prereqs and stuff, assignments. All righty. Let's move on. Let's talk about the benefits of outside resource materials. So here are some outside resource materials that are easily available to us in the fire service. You have the reports from the National Institute of Standards and Technology. You have reports from NIOSH. NIST mostly deals with things that have happened either in the past, or they deal with things that the fire service has noted in the future. Your NIOSH reports are usually about safety equipment and things that aren't being used correctly. You have your user-generated video, like this, for example, the webinar and the web course, the webinar and the YouTube sessions. You've got your supplementary texts, which, we've got quite a few of those here, especially in the pre-learning chapter and chapter 1 throughout. And then you have fire and emergency services related websites. So you have, for example, the firefighter close calls the Chief Goldfeeder puts together. You've got all that stuff, and that's a wealth of knowledge for talking about near misses and talking about just general training throughout the service. Anybody else have any good websites that they use to take care of that information? We're talking about fire and emergency services websites, like different resource websites. Fire engineering, TEACS, videos and stuff, standard videos and things like that. Okay. Anybody else? Webinar guys, you got anything? As far as like websites and stuff? Yeah, I mainly use Goldfeeder. I use Fire Engineering. There's a lot of stuff I see on Facebook that I put together for courses. The first website that I said just now, um, firefighterclosecalls.com, I believe. But that's a good one to get like safety information and stuff off of. Firefighter Close Calls. Hitting it hard from the yard. There you go. There you go. Thank you, Chief Allison. Anybody else? Sheldon, Joby, Kevin? No, we've actually got Kevin's here, Sheldon's here, Chief Allison's here, Joby's here. Yep, firefighterclosecalls.com, what Kevin just said. All right, let's move on. So how do the students benefit when instructors use outside resource material? Jeff, you just said something. Run that by me one more time. There you go. It helps us see what's going on versus the outside world. And there's a lot of good outside material that is generated out there. You know, you've got a lot of different guys talking about a lot of different stuff. If you want to talk about extrication, it's out there. If you want to talk about EMS skills, it's out there. But you give your students a different perspective, another instructor's perspective, when you actually go outside of the resource, when you go outside of the course and you talk about outside resource material. So there's quite a few things out there that we use, especially putting this together. Exactly. You might do something, you guys might do something different than we do. Mooresville does a different thing. It's a good thing just to kind of mix up tactics and strategies and figure out, you know, the outside stuff. So let's move on. This is a big one. Discuss copyright laws and permissions involved with instructional materials. So you can't just pass stuff off as it's your own. Here we have something that talks about copyright laws and legal guidelines for the use of training materials. So you have fair use and you have copyright infringement. So when we're talking about fair use, we're talking about using a chapter of a book or an article from a newspaper or a graph from a periodical. So fair use is generally defined as something, there's two things. You've got fair use where things are out in the public domain and you can use them, you know, one piece of it, one section of it, and then you have copyright infringement. So for example, let's say that I want you guys to have a good idea of what's being covered in chapter 3 of the book. So I photocopied a couple pages and I hand it out to you. That's fair use. Now, if I took the whole book and I copied the entire book line for line, word for word, and handed it to you and said, here you go, here this is, that would be definite copyright infringement. Like, for example, the book in this class. If I want to copy off some stuff out of it, I can. But for the most part, you guys are referring to the entire book, which you guys had to buy or borrow or so on and so forth. So if a student does not have a textbook and you make a copy of your text for the student, have you broken copyright laws? If the student does not have a textbook and you make a copy from yours for the student, have you broken copyright laws? Chief Allison says yes. Jeff Dilley says yes. And I say yes, because that's against the law. It's against how everything was deployed. It's against how everything was put out there. So be very careful when you're talking about getting media to students, because if you copy the entire textbook and hand it over, that is going to be an issue, and you're breaking the law. You are opening yourself and your department to a significant copyright issue. Moving on. People have a right of privacy. Invasion of privacy depends upon several factors. Where and who, permissions, restrictions, and the right of individuals. So, and I'm not really sure what this slide is supposed to be depicting, but people have the right to privacy. So, give us a minute. I'm going to look this up real quick. We'll be right back. Yes, okay. Memory jogged. So, for example, when we started this class, the very first day I handed you guys a photo and picture release, and I said, look, you guys need to take a look at this and then let me know if that's okay. Because students in your class and people have the right to privacy. So the release that you guys signed gives the Brooklyn Volunteer Fire Department, namely me, it gives me permission to distribute your image, your likeness throughout this course. That's especially going to be necessary when we talk about the mini presentations, when we're videotaping you guys for analysis and so on and so forth. But you had to give me specific permission to be able to do that. And then that release also talks about the restrictions and it talks about your rights. So make sure if you're going to be taking pictures of students, if you're going to be videotaping students, if you're going to be catching audio tape on students, you have to make sure that all of that information is documented and you have a very strong release written to make sure that those students understand what you're going to be doing with that video. So that's a huge thing, especially for an online course where we're talking about video, where you guys are answering questions. I try to make sure that I'm restating what you say on the video before I post it to YouTube, so on and so forth. So you have to pay attention to that because some students do not want to be videotaped and they will become extremely upset if you do. So be very careful with that stuff. Why were copyright laws established for training materials? Okay, Jeff says because you have to buy their book. Exactly. And that's basically why copyright laws exist, to make sure that we're using it within the use of the individual person. Like all the web files that I'm generating for this course, they're going straight to YouTube. And so the not really explicit, but people have my permission to use that stuff in their own Fire Instructor 1 courses and to go back and be able to instruct their students using some of our material. So you'll see a lot of this on the internet. It's all about the money, exactly. You'll see this back on the internet where we talk about different materials like firefighter close calls or things like that. Those things are generally okay for training materials because that's how they're distributed. Talk about Wikipedia for a moment. Wikipedia actually has a statement, a license statement from the Creative Commons license, and that's how that information is released to the world. You're given a, there are various different types and levels of copyright permissions that are given through that material. So when we get a minute, I'll pull that up and I'll probably add that to the stuff on the website just to make sure it's there. Let's talk about training aids that an instructor can use in both the classroom and training environments. So you have non-projected, you have projected, and you have simulations. So let's talk about the non-projected first. And this is old school, man. We're talking about chalkboards. I haven't seen a chalkboard in a classroom for a while. I'm sure they're still using them. Actually, my kids at school, they still have chalkboards and stuff. Huh? What, chalkboards?
Same concept, huh?
You've got marker boards, like we said, the dry erase board, um, back to the chalkboard. You have easel pads. I can remember some of the first training instruction that I did was all in easel pads. So imagine taking a group of, 15, 16-year-old kids and telling them, hey, you got to write out your presentation on this easel pad. So it took a lot of preparation to put that stuff together on an easel pad, because basically what you do is you would go in and you would look at the syllabus material, the lesson plan for that particular lesson. So at the same time you were practicing it, you were setting up your easel pad as well. So sometimes you had to go back and write on the easel pad during the live delivery. What a couple guys did is they took some of that paper adhesive stuff, sprayed it all over their presentation, and then covered it up with another sheet of paper, kind of like a poor man's PowerPoint, as it were. So, illustrations. You can have like things from your book, like pie charts, graphs, case studies, things like that, that you would duplicate and have to do handouts on. You got diagram displays. You have duplicated materials and models. You have audio recordings, and you have casualty simulations. Those are all forms of non-projected training aids. Now let's talk about projected. And you guys have seen this probably. You guys will see at least 1, 2, 3 in this class. You've got your video and your multimedia projectors, which have been a huge thing for the fire service. You have your interactive whiteboards. We have a couple of these up at Indianapolis EMS. They don't get used that often because the technology is about 5 to 7 years old. But you have whiteboards that you can actually write on and interact with. You have your visual presenters or your displays, and you have television programs and video presentations. So that's a huge one for this class. We're doing a lot of video. We're doing a lot of programs. You guys have had some assignments from the TED texts or from the TED website. You've had a lot of assignments that are on YouTube, so on and so forth. But that's a huge thing, is other television programs and video presentations from the outside. So let's talk about simulators. And this is a huge thing for us down here because we've got some simulation technology, but it's very cost prohibitive and it's very expensive. But there are some examples of some things that are distributed out there. For example, SimsUshare is a huge one that we have used here in the past, and we've looked at some other ones. But SimsUshare is generally a pretty good simulator. It's kind of a cross between computer and virtual reality. So you have your electronic simulators, you have your display boards, you have a smoke simulator or a fog machine. A lot of fire departments have those. You have your computer simulations. You have your virtual reality simulations. And you have your anatomical, your physiological mannequins. So I can remember there was a time where I took 4 or 5 guys from Brooklyn. I took them up to Indianapolis EMS, and we actually had access to an anatomical physiological simulator called SimMan. And we actually did evolutions for about 2 or 3 hours on SimMan, talking about various different types of incidents. But I wanted to make sure that we gave that opportunity, because we don't give them an opportunity to practice on a mannequin a lot. That's high fidelity. And SimMan will actually cough, he'll sneeze, he'll puke, he'll groan, he'll moan, all kinds of different stuff. So if you have the opportunity to use electronic simulators, that's something that the students would like, and very much so. It gives you a chance to kind of break things down on a different level and run from there. Let's talk about training props. They can be permanent or portable devices. You can get on a lot of websites and see how other departments put together their props. A lot of departments have props that they use. You can see here on this example, it looks like these guys are doing confined space, or not confined space, but they're doing urban search and rescue, looks like. Either that or some sort of some sort of simulation on building collapse. But you can see they're wearing their tech gear. They've got their helmets on. They've got their backpacks. Huh? Yeah, they're probably doing confined space as well. So, but a lot of departments, some departments have props, some departments don't have props. Like, for example, here at Brooklyn, we don't have a lot of props. Something we've been talking about doing, but, we just haven't got around to it yet. You go to a department like Mooresville or Brown or even Martinsville, and those guys have training props so they can continuously practice their skills in that way, shape, and form. I've seen a really neat one these days. It's called the fire sled. Have you guys seen the fire sled? It's this big kind of cart looking thing, and you can do a hose drag, you can do a ceiling pull, you can simulate extra or forcible entry, all kinds of stuff like that. But you look it up on the web. It's called fire. Yeah, there we go, Kevin. You've seen it before, I assume, in some of the pictures. Awesome. Here's a big thing. Proper care and cleaning of training aids can prevent damage. So I want to make sure that my projector's clean and functioning correctly. I want to make sure that SimMan is cleaned up and ready to go. Sometimes they get a lot of training lubricants in their throats, so you got to go back and clean all that out and make sure it's all ready and good to go. Big thing with training aids, especially because a lot of those training aids, you're talking at least $500 to $1,000 for a good EMS training aid. So what kind of training aids are used by an instructor in the classroom or the training environment? PowerPoint, video, webinar guys, cadavers. Right, exactly. What else, guys? Webinar guys, reach out. There we go. Whiteboards and chalkboards. Training facilities, huh? Props, paper, written out papers, handouts, models. Oh, cool. Cool. Audio recordings. We kind of use quite a few of those in this class, don't we? Virtual reality. That's a huge one. I remember a couple of guys in the department I went to FDIC last year, and we see this engine trainer. And so I've got one of my guys who's sitting in the left hand, or who's sitting in the right hand seat. I'm sitting in the driver's seat, and we get the truck started. We get moving in our direction. I'm running my lights. I'm running my siren. Yeah, exactly. So we're driving to the scene, and all of a sudden I hear this thump, and I'm like, uh-oh. They had set up this simulation so there was a child that ran out behind a parked car chasing a basketball, and you came right up on him at the same time. So the intended look was for the person in the right-hand seat to be scanning the right-hand side of the engine, letting you know what was going on. So needless to say, I did not pass that simulation, and I struck a simulated kid. So 2 days later, we go back, and it's me sitting in the right-hand seat and the other guy driving, and he does the exact same thing that I do. But that's an example of a training aid. Prevented? Yeah. So Sims You Share is a different one because you can actually go in and you can set up all different types of fire demonstrations and tactics and strategies and all kinds of different stuff. So it's pretty cost effective. It's about $75 a year for an individual seat and like $450 a year for as many seats as you want. So which CPR thing? Yeah, the Lucas. Oh, it's awesome, but it's expensive, dude. It's like a $3,000 tool to do that. Everybody doing good so far? Any questions, issues? Webinar guys? Let's summarize the benefits of using training aids in the classroom environment. They enhance student understanding. They increase acceptance. They add interest to a lecture. They clarify, prove, or emphasize a key point, and they enhance memory. So we go back to day one. I asked you guys who had seen the Salman Khan video. It was about a 25, 26, 27-minute video. But I put that in to make sure that you guys understood what our focus is with this class, flipping the classroom and trying to get that information out there for you guys. I see that there's a lot of buy-in on these particular presentations because you guys understand the material and it's laid out and taken care of. Adding interest to a lecture. You know, I can sit here and I can lecture for a good 45, 55 minutes to 2 hours, and you guys just may be kind of bogged down and be like, oh. So about, the first 30, 40 minutes in, I want to add something. I want to add local interest. For example, I teach in time, the traffic incident management course. And peppered in there in quite a few spots are different videos that we kind of add in to lighten up the mood. Like there's one with two police officers. One's driving his police car. The other one is driving a Mustang, a Shelby GT to be exact. And the first cop is driving the Shelby GT while the second cop is like following them with lights and sirens. So finally, the guy in the Shelby pulls over, and the police car pulls over. They jump out and they switch spots. And the kid in the back seat of the cop car is like, "Hey, are you guys just gonna let me go now?" And the cops are like, "Well, not yet." But we add little things like that in there to kind of lighten up the class and keep the class, on point and continue moving forward. Clarifying, proving, or emphasizing a key point. If there's a key point, you want to make sure that you flag that for the students and the students understand that that is something they need to remember. And then it enhances memory. You remember a unique training aid like a video, like a patient simulator, things of that nature. They help students organize ideas. Again, we go back to the premise that different students learn differently in different ways. So for example, Dilly, you may learn one way. I've got Jimmy in here this morning. Jimmy Linder popped in. He's hanging out for the class today. Kind of had to be on my toes around Jimmy because that's just the way he is. There you go, exactly. But they help students organize their ideas about a topic. You gain and maintain the students' attention, so you make sure that everybody's paying attention. They're looking at you. You got eye contact, so on and so forth. It's harder to do in the webinar format, but it can be done, like asking questions and getting you guys to respond back. They illustrate a sequence of steps, events or steps in a process, especially for like practical evolutions like throwing ladders or EMS, things of that nature. You want to make sure that you've got a sequence of events that you're following and kind of illustrate those to the students to help them perform that process. And they save lecture time. Like I say before, I can sit here and lecture for almost 2 hours about a topic, but if I don't give you, if I overload the lecture, you guys are going to be tuned off and not really be able to follow everything. So when you've got training aids and materials, you just kind of pass that out and you have them look at them and say, hey, okay, here's a training aid. Go look at this in your own spare time. We've done that with quite a few things so far. And then I look for validation between the students at the end when I go back and look at homework and quizzes and tests and so on and so forth. So how are training aids beneficial in the classroom? Keep students focused. Webinar guys, hands-on, keeps them interested, enhances understanding. Thank you, Kevin. Figure out how to use them. What's that? Keep you from falling asleep. That's a big one. Bring extra knowledge. Perfect. Perfect. That's just like Moodle. Everything's set up on Moodle so you guys can basically go through it at your own pace. Now, with that said, I'll be going back and reviewing those training aids to make sure you guys are having or are actually on the same pace. Clarifying key points. Thank you, Kevin. Chief Allison, Joby, anything? What's that? Saving lecture time. All righty. Let's move on. In summary, instructors rely on training materials and equipment to deliver instruction. Lesson plans are the most important training material. Instructors should be familiar with all parts of a lesson plan. They should know how to operate, clean, and maintain most common equipment.